Everyone, this is Yvonne again, and I am here to present this week's multimedia project, which is titled Leadership, the Cross, and Me. So here's my scenario. You've been hired as the new Human Resources Executive Director for the California Department of Education. It's been brought to your attention that 30% of the employees will be retiring this year and that there are no viable options for successorship within the entire organization. In addition, the department needs to lay off 20% of the staff in order to meet their budget. And if that isn't enough, it's also been brought to your attention that the remaining staff has lost morale and the agency would like you to implement a program to turn employee morale around and train the remaining managers on motivating their lackluster staff to motivate them to follow regulation and enforce the agency's policies. So where do you start? CDE is a large organization. There's several people that have worked there, and if you're not familiar with the agency, they tend to have had a reputation for not enforcing the regulations and the ed codes, and just it has that overall reputation of a public organization that really doesn't do their job, that they're very lax in terms of their responsibilities. So coming into this scenario, you have some huge hurdles that you're going to have to overcome or come up with creative ideas and ways to go ahead and implement that. To make it easier in the scenario, I just went ahead and said, where would you start? So hopefully this slideshow will help you and kind of get your creative juices flowing. So for me personally, I chose 3 leadership theories that I thought would work good. I actually like these 3 theories for myself in terms of being a manager. I've used each one of them in the different positions that I've had, and so they have proven effective. I think in terms of the scenario that's been played out or set up before you, you could see each and every one of these working to do like immediate damage control and kind of buy you some time before you get into the next aspect of the planning phase so that you can go ahead and turn this organization around over a longer period of time. So the first one is the transformational leadership theory. The reason why I picked transformational leadership is because that one's going to be the one that cultivates relationship and kind of creates everybody is a leader or everybody can be a leader. It's from this perspective, the person leads, but it's always leading with bringing everybody else up as well. So I think this would be a good one to apply because obviously if you're losing 50% of your staff, you're going to need to have, or you will have in place, at least a small percentage, even if it's 10%. If you have one really strong leader, and when I say strong, I don't mean strong in terms of power or micromanaging, but strong in terms of influencing and motivating their staff, if you can take that person and help them to multiply those skills and just kind of be mentored from them, you have an opportunity to be able to rebuild or multiply that within the organization. The next leadership theory that I picked was servant leadership. Personally, just being a believer, this one has always been something that I've chosen to live by. A servant leadership style is one that always asks, how can I help you? And they usually will cause people to follow them out of love and out of loyalty rather than out of fear. If a person feels less threatened, if you're coming alongside of them and you're kind of finding opportunities to how you can help them, I think most people will genuinely sense, even if you in the beginning they're a little bit suspicious, I think that'll kind of wind down over time once they see that that is your character. It kind of puts guards down and it just creates an atmosphere and an environment where everybody feels like they can kind of get up. And the third one I picked was a contingency theory. The reason why I picked this one was because the way that it described it in our book is that it's finding the the right leader to fit the situation. So in CDE, in this particular situation, you're going to run into different employees, I guess, there. And you may find, as you're kind of doing this needs assessment, that there are people within the organization, they just might not be working in that correct department. So you might have people that have the skills but just haven't been given the opportunity. And so by applying this theory, you'll be able to kind of get a broad assessment of what you have, again, so that we can do that first part of damage control and just kind of making sure that we can keep the organization floating. So this is the way that I would apply it. Starting with the transformational theory, I'd begin building relationships with the remaining staff members. I'd meet with administrators and managers to get an assessment of what they see are the challenges and successes within their departments. And I would also have candid conversations about how the potential losses will impact the organization. I call this sort of like a needs assessment. While I'm doing that, I'm actually, as I gather that information from the managers and the administrators, I'm going to actually assess those managers and the administrators to kind of get a feel for where they're at in terms of their leadership style and how what they're seeing as the outcomes or the potential outcomes within their department. It'll kind of give me a better understanding of how the role that they play in how the department moves. Being that I'm a new person, I don't have all of this information, and so I'm forced to find ways to kind of survey and rely on the information that's being given to me from the managers, but at the same time keeping my critical thinking skills and my awareness for the personalities of the people that are currently in those higher positions and how their managing style trickles down onto the employees. So for the servant leadership application, I'd immediately demonstrate that I'm a person of my word. I would look for ways to encourage and assist the staff with resources. And when I say resources, I would do it from both ends. For those people that are going to be retiring, I would actually provide a series of workshops offering that kind of assistance. And if there's employees, immediately when you let employees know that there's going to be a layoff, fear sets in right away. There's not a way to kind of minimize that because you're talking about somebody's financial security. So in addition to that, I would actually take time from my own schedule to provide resources like other places that are hiring. I would make phone calls to other agencies and let them know, hey, this is what's going on within our organization. Because obviously coming into this position, I would have already have networked with other agencies and kind of been around different industries and kind of type match skills I would look for. So let's say we had an account clerk position that was going to get laid off. I would look for other positions in other public agencies where the skill function of the job was similar, so that way people wouldn't feel like they were just left hanging with no support and no resource, and what am I going to do? And for those people who were choosing to go the route of unemployment, I'd also provide workshops where you had assistance in completing that paperwork and kind of giving them time frames. I think the biggest thing with that is to not to catch people off guard. So rather than just saying, hey, you got to do these layoffs, I think I would have I guess meetings or informal meetings where we just kind of talk to them about the process and walk them through. So when we get to that point, if I can give you more or less like a guesstimate time frame, I think that would help to ease some of the fear, because obviously people are going to have to get adapted to just the idea that they may be possibly losing their job. And a lot of these things, in addition, just to demonstrate that servanthood, is I would invest my own personal time just making those one-on-one connections with the people as we kind of go through this process, so that they know that they still have a resource. And then the last one is the contingency theory application. So for this one, I would assess the remaining staff for employees who have the skills to advance, even if they're not familiar with the department. And then I'd create mentoring teams immediately before the layoffs to provide opportunities for cross-training. Obviously, in such a short amount of time, I didn't specifically put a timeline to how quick this change would need to happen, but I do I think any information that you can get is good information. And then I would also have, during these cross-training periods, have the managers and the administrators be on the lookout for potential leaders, or if there's ways that they can restructure the process. I know a lot of times when you go through huge change like this, there's things that we found that just when you're working for a public agency that you've been doing them the same way for like 30, 40 years, and nobody ever really knows why they're doing those processes that way. So I think this scenario would actually provide an opportunity to make the systems more effective. Areas that you can streamline. Why are we looking at this information? Do we need this information? And actually being able to vamp and kind of cut, because now you're going down to a reduction of 50% of your staff. So with 50% of the staff gone in a short amount of time, it means other people are going to have to pick up the workload. So in order to do that, you may need to really relook at why you're doing the processes and how you're implementing them, and see if they're really effective for the overall goal of the agency. So Hertzberg's thoughts. In this particular situation, so Hertzberg kind of has his ideas on what motivates people and what doesn't motivate people. So he refers to them as motivators and hygiene. According to him, people are motivated to work harder when they have a sense of responsibility and the work that they have is meaningful and fulfilling, and they have achievement and recognition. So his hygiene factors, which are the things that demotivate people if they're not present, he listed that they were money, rewards, good working conditions, and appropriate supervision and responsibilities. So being that you're going to lose all these staff, the first thing that I would approach with would be to kind of revision them and help them to understand what their purpose is. You're going to have to hit that meaningful work card really fast. And that's why I have all the pictures of these kids. Working for the Department of Education, because you're so high up there, a lot of times what happens is people forget why they're doing what they're doing. So I would set up these kind of meetings or like these vision casting and things, not necessarily to go, when I say vision casting, I don't mean to cast vision into the future, but to kind of give them assessment of why we're doing what we do. I'm going to hit that meaningful, fulfilling work card real fast. Also, with the cutoffs, I'm going to look, a lot of times when you have older employees that have been retiring, those are usually the employees that are at the higher end of the pay scale. So we're going to look for some type of ways to bring in these new staff at the lower end of the pay scale, because we're going to need to replace those employees that are retiring, that 30%. But we're also going to look for ways to make sure that even though we have to cut these budgets, that it's not going to affect those employees that are staying on. And so I'm going to look for ways to just make sure that that aspect isn't, the financial aspect isn't going to be rocked. A lot of times when people think of layoffs and you think layoffs in an organization, those people that are still there or remain in the organization have that fear that what if we get furloughs? What if we get demotions? What if it starts to affect our pay? So I'm going to reiterate and kind of provide that security to those remaining employees so that they know that particular aspect isn't in jeopardy. So we all follow someone. On this particular part of the slide, we were asked to, in general, what type of leader do I prefer to follow? And we were asked to use the ones in the video, and so I did take that. But I think for me, I tend to strive towards people who make big change. Like I want those leaders that are personable, but they understand that they're not the Lone Ranger, that there is part of a team and that their success is due to their team. When you find people like that, it's very easy to follow. They tend to not be boisterous. They tend to be more humble, but they have very strong leadership skills. They have very strong people skills. And so I put two quotes on here just to kind of keep that humility, but understand why it is that people do what we do. And lastly, on the last slide, in general, what type of leader do I strive to be? I wanted to put something on here that kind of demonstrates all encompassing of all the things that I think leadership is. And again, this is just for me personally. I know each person will have something different, but you'll see the pictures that I picked. I picked Abraham Lincoln, I picked Walt Disney, and I picked Mother Teresa. I know it sounds, it's a weird bunch of people, and then on the top I wrote, when I grow up, I want to be like Jesus. I think each one of these leaders demonstrated a facet of Jesus's character. And that's the reason why I use the diamond and I've referred to multifaceted, because Jesus is an all-encompassing leader. I think that's probably the greatest leader that we had, that was able to demonstrate in so many areas. And so each one of these leaders takes a piece of the facets of who he is and was able to actually implement them here on earth in the time that they were here. And so for me, I picked Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was just a sacrificial humanitarian. And so I think she best demonstrated the love of Christ and just hope for humanity and just this compassion and just this understanding to see past all the garbage in this world, for lack of a better word. And so I think that's really, really effective, because you're going to deal with different people's personalities and things that they go through. And so you're going to need to have a little bit of Mother Teresa when you're working in the workplace, because not everybody is going to think like you. The next person that I picked was Walt Disney. And the reason why I picked Walt was for the creativity. There is so much creativity that God can give to a person. And so I think in not only in this particular situation, but when working in any public administrative program, creativity is going to be necessary in this particular scenario, because there's such a dynamic going on, like a huge dynamic. You're going to need to get creative with the ways that you start to tackle each one of those tasks to turn that organization around, because there's going to be a lot of morale lost. And so I think Walt is the best example of just, there's no limit. There's no limit. If you can think it, you can do it. And I think that's truly what makes a great leader, having that imagination, having that childlike possibility, and being willing to take the risks. And then, of course, I picked Abraham Lincoln, just because Abraham Lincoln was a really strong leader. And there were times when Jesus had to address situations in ways that didn't necessarily go with the culture. And so I think because of the way that he came across, I think Abraham Lincoln really, really emulated that in a good way, but he was still able to hold his leadership. I just think that thinking outside of the box sometimes really is, it may not always be the right answer, but I think it's an avenue in to finding the right answer and then finding the right solution. So thank you for listening to me rant on, and I hope you guys do well for the rest of this week. Thanks.